Hi, thanks for joining me for another video. In this one, we're going to look at getting started with Azure Automation and Power Automate. These are two of my favorite tools in Office 365 and Microsoft 365 when it comes to using them for provisioning, for reporting, for automating certain activities. Power Automate, a flow within there for starting an activity, triggering it off of some third-party system, off of an entry in a SharePoint list, and then going out and calling Azure Automation in order to run some PowerShell, whether it's to make up for a shortcoming in Power Automate or to run more of a complex script that's going out and grabbing some information, putting it in a SQL database, or doing some type of creation of Microsoft Teams or Office 365 groups or SharePoint sites. You can use these two tools together to create a lot of really cool functionality automations. So let's spend the next 10-15 minutes walk through getting started with it. Hope you enjoy. The first thing we're going to do in this demo is we are going to head over to Azure. So we'll just go to portal.azure.com. And before we set up anything with Power Automate, we're going to start with Azure Automation because we need some PowerShell to actually call from our workflow. Once you're in Azure, if you go look for automation, you'll see automation accounts is one of the services in Azure. We'll go ahead and click on that. You can see I already have a few demo accounts here. I'm going to go in and add a new account. So we'll name this the Global Con 1 2020. We're going to put this in our demo resources subscription. In our resource group, we'll put it in demos. Location, East US is fine. You can leave create Azure Run As account and click create. This will go off and start creating that deployment of that new Azure Automation account. So the nice thing about Azure Automation is it's actually a free service. The first 500 minutes your PowerShell runs, completely free. You don't have to pay a penny for it. Once you get over 500 minutes, you can upgrade, and then it's like 0.25 cents per minute of PowerShell running. So this is actual scripts running within the account. So even to get to 500 minutes a month of active running PowerShell is quite a bit. I have rarely hit that. In the few instances I have, paying an extra 0.25 cents a minute isn't that bad. Maybe you're gonna pay $5 or $10. So again, great service, free, you can't go wrong. So let's go ahead and refresh it. Sometimes they don't always show up. Looks like it's still provisioning up here. There we go. Everything all provisioned. So if we refresh our screen here, you can see now we have our Global Con 1 2020 Azure Automation account. Let's click into this, and there's lots of things that you can do in Azure Automation. For our demo here, we're just going to focus on a few that we need if we're going to write PowerShell and run PowerShell against Office 365. One of the first things that we want to do is look at our modules here. A lot of modules are installed by default. Typically, they all revolve around Azure. So you can see here we have Azure Compute, Azure Profile. In our case, we want Office 365 modules. So if we click Browse Gallery here, we're going to go out and it's going to actually search the same PS Gallery that you would use if you did an install module from just a normal PowerShell session, a PowerShell, I want to call it a command prompt, but a PowerShell console on Windows. Here's a bunch of them. We're going to look for SharePoint here. So let's go look for our SharePoint modules to start. Here's our SharePoint PNP PowerShell Online. Let's grab that one and okay. Here's our Microsoft Online SharePoint PowerShell. We're going to grab that module as well. Another one we may want is if we're working with Microsoft Teams. We can go grab the Microsoft Teams PowerShell module. If you're going to start doing some of the automation flow management in PowerShell, you can go grab that module as well. So we can go look for flow. Here's our Power Apps administration module. Sure, why not grab that one as well? PowerShell or Power Apps module, we can grab that one. The other one we actually want is Azure AD, and we have the Azure AD preview. I actually like the preview module, so we'll grab that one. Let's import that module, And now if we go to our modules, we'll see a bunch of these here are importing. Our SharePoint modules, our administration modules, our Azure AD module is in here. So those are all importing, so we can use the commandlets that are in those modules within Azure Automation. The next thing we may want to do is store credentials. Typically, if you're running PowerShell scripts, you're not going to want to store the credentials for Office 365. You don't want your username and password in plain text. I definitely don't want them in plain text when I'm doing a public session. So I'm going to go create a few credential objects, and these credentials can then be used in your PowerShell scripts, and I'll show you how to use those here in a minute. So we'll add a credential. We're going to make this one a PowerShell admin credential because I actually use this in one of the scripts I will show you later. This is PowerShell and intelligent.com. All right, here's our PowerShell password, and go ahead and save that one. And then another one I use is there is a SQL reporting credential I also use in some scripts if I am writing certain information to a database so that I can use it later. Copy that one, paste that one in. So now we have a couple of credential objects that we can take advantage of when we're writing our PowerShell scripts. Other than that, variables, if you did want to store something in a variable, you could use this variables to store strings, store connection strings, certain constants maybe you want to use across scripts. I don't tend to use anything in variables. I tend to just use the credentials. Once we have those, really the next thing we're going to do is go look at these runbooks. Runbooks are a PowerShell script. There are several different kinds. First thing I'm going to do is go clean up some of these sample ones they put in here so those don't get in our way. So we can clean those up. Every Azure Automation account, you're going to get these sample scripts in here. So now we have a nice, clean Azure Automation account. We'll go create a new runbook. This is going to be our GC, we'll call it a GC 2020 demo for GlobalCon. You can see we have a few different runbook types. We can do PowerShell, Python, graphical, or we have these PowerShell workflow and graphical PowerShell workflow. If you've ever dealt with workflow scripts versus PowerShell scripts, there's a few differences there in terms of being able to essentially pick up at a given state. So workflows kind of keep track of where you are. You can set certain checkpoints, and if you stop a script and resume it, you can pick up from there. Every once in a while, I have had to use a workflow in Azure Automation because there is I think it's called a fair use policy with Azure Automation. Essentially, they're not going to let you run a PowerShell script for more than a few hours. I think the limit is around 120 minutes, or consume too many resources, or you start taking away from resources available to others. So they kick you out, stop your runbook, and start it over again. If you're using a workflow, it lets you kind of resume where you left off. If you're not, you'll start your workflow or your PowerShell script over again. It'll just keep running in circles, and you won't ever actually finish because you're not able to pick up at that state and kind of resume where you were. If you think you have a script that's going to take a couple hours, if you're churning through tens of thousands of users and think it's going to kick you out before you finish, you may have to use a workflow. We're not going to deal with that here. We're just going to do straight up PowerShell scripts. Let's go in and choose PowerShell and click Create. And this will go out and create our runbook. This is our PowerShell canvas here. So we can just start typing right in here, get SP site. We could do a connect to PNP online. One thing you may notice is that there is no tabbing. It's not prompting me for anything. Now get SP site is showing up only because I used it up here. But if I would try to do like a set PNP and start hitting tab, you'll see it just tabs across. Authoring scripts in Azure Automation, it works okay if you need to make a small change, but if you're trying to do anything big, I usually revert back to my ISE, go back to Visual Studio Code. You can write these scripts and we'll do a credential equals, and this is where we can actually use some of those credentials we set. So we can go in here, find our PowerShell admin, add to canvas, and this will go get that credential object and store it in here. So then later we can do something like a connect PNP online. We'd have to set our URL to some URL and then credentials, and then go ahead and use that credential variable. Same thing with SQL reporting. You can add that one in there. So just a couple different ways to get those credentials. Once you have your PowerShell script in there, if you do want to test it, they give you this test pane where you can go test out your runbook, see it queued up, it'll start to run here, and give us our output down here as that job keeps going. So it really is a full-blown PowerShell session where you can get your output, you can view your output. Once you have it tested, you can save it, you can run it, you can view your previous jobs and actually look at the output, look for errors, look for warnings. Whatever you may get as a result of running your PowerShell script, you can do a write host as well. So, we could do something like a write host hello world, and that would actually write it out to this host as well. So this is still running. We'll queue it up. We may come back to this one, but in the interest of time, we'll keep going. You'll see some of these outputs and some of what is displayed here later as we keep going through this session. So we talked a little bit about editing these PowerShell scripts. We can save it, we can publish it. It's now available. If you want a nice way to keep some source control on these, to take advantage of something like Azure DevOps or GitHub to manage your PowerShell scripts, keep your version control there, and use that. I know as IT pros that can be a little scary, but as kind of the IT pro role evolves, as we start using Azure and JSON and defining even VMs in Azure and networking in Azure, it really is important as IT pros, I think, to start learning how some of these source control tools work. I do have an Azure DevOps environment, and I think I lost it here. So let's go over to dev.azure.com/IntelliJink. And I have an Azure Automation account here, and I can go into my repos and my files. And here I have a bunch of PowerShell scripts. These are a bunch of demo PowerShell scripts. I do have a couple Office 365 reporting ones, some other PowerShell down here. I can connect my Azure Automation to this. So if we go back to our Azure Automation account and scroll down further, you have this option here. I've lost it, source control, where you can go in. Right now I have no source control, but I'm going to add one. So let's add our Azure DevOps, we'll call it Automation Demos. And I do Azure repos with Git. Let's go authenticate. It'll prompt up with my company account, my work account. I'm going to accept that. And once it goes in and authorizes, you will see now I have all my repositories. I have an Azure Automation Demos, which I'm not actually using. We want this Azure Automation. We're going to just select our master branch and folder. Because we're going down to demos, I'm not going to connect up at this top level. I want to connect just to this demos folder. So I'm going to do a /demos. Yes, I want to sync it. I want to publish these runbooks, and we can save. And an error occurred because it's demos and not demo. Let's try that again. Save it. That's saved. We can open it up now and start a sync. And it's set to auto sync, but I want to push it through a little bit faster so we can start to see what's available there. Let's go back to our runbooks now, and hopefully it started. Oh, hasn't started pulling them in quite yet. While we wait, grab a cup of coffee. There you go. So now you can see they're starting to come in as it syncs it all up. So this is pulling in all of those copies, some multi-value fields, some of my provisioning scripts, and pulling all of these into my Azure Automation account. At this point in time, you're really good to go. Your Azure Automation account is set up. You have your modules. You have those credentials stored. I've pulled in these scripts. We're going to walk through these when I get to how we can help with sprawl with all this. But I'm going to go through kind of the rest of the setup, and then we'll jump into some of the real-world examples of how we use these. So we'll let this keep syncing. And let's jump over to Flow now, or to Power Automate. Now that we're in Power Automate, I do have some demos already set up here. I'm going to just go create a new one, and we'll do an instant, and we'll call this another GlobalCon 2020. And we'll do demo, and we're going to manually trigger this. Go ahead and create it and do a new step. Next new step, let's add our automation account. So we're going to search for automation, and here is Azure Automation. You will notice these are premium connectors. You can create a job, you can get the job output, you can get the status of the job, but they are all premium. These used to be part of the standard connectors. Microsoft recently changed and said, anytime you're connecting to Azure, it's premium. Unfortunately, if you are going to use Power Automate and a flow in Power Automate to call Azure Automation and call these scripts, you are going to have to get the appropriate licensing to leverage premium connectors. If you can't do that, one thing that I've found that a lot of my clients tend to go to is Azure Logic Apps. Everything I'm going to show you in Power Automate, you can do in Azure Logic Apps. Power Automate is built on top of Azure Logic Apps. Connectors are all there. You can do Azure Automation. Downside with Logic Apps is you are going to pay for per run, per action, instead of having it be a part of your flow quota. It's fractions of a cent. It's like 0.02 cents or 0.1 cent or something ridiculously cheap like that. So if you're doing a small script, it may actually be cheaper to put this in Azure Logic Apps where this connector to Azure Automation is free, and do that instead of having to pay for these premium connectors in Azure Automation. Choice is up to you. You're just going to have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of some of that licensing, and if you want to do this in Logic Apps or Power Automate. I'm going to show it to you in Power Automate today. Again, always switch it over to Logic Apps. You can create it in Power Automate, export it, import it into Logic Apps, whatever you choose. So we're going to choose to create a job, and now we're going to start filling this out. So the subscription we created a bunch of these in was my demo resources subscription. My resource group was demos and automation accounts. You can see here's the one we already created. That's right there. And the runbook name. It pulls in all of our runbooks. Let's start with the sample no parameters just to show you something really basic. And wait for job. This is if you want to choose for the job to start right away and then just keep moving down through your flow, or if you want to start the job and then actually essentially pause at this step until the job is complete. Most of the time, I'm going to choose to wait for the job to complete, primarily because there's usually dependencies where subsequent steps rely on something that's done in the PowerShell script. If not, and if you're just trying to churn through a bunch of things and maybe you want to just fire off a bunch of runs of this runbook right in a row and there are no dependencies, feel free to check no and just let it churn through. Runbook parameters, right here you see it's asking for a key value pair. Don't worry about that. We don't have any parameters on this one. We could save it just like this and go run it. I'm going to flip over to a different one a minute to show you a little bit more. Here we have sample parameters. This one I have a couple parameters in, and you'll see now instead of asking for a key value pair, it actually asks for variable B and variable A. Let's jump quickly over to Azure Automation and actually, or this is DevOps, we'll look at it here. We'll open up our sample parameters. Here it is. So I have my parameters. Here's that variable A it's asking for, variable B, and then I'm just doing a variable B, converting the string to an integer, adding up the sum, and then writing the output. A very simple script doing some simple math. So if we go back to our flow now, let's put a couple numbers in here. Let's do 10 and 15 because adding those two numbers is easy. So we should get 25 as our output. We can go ahead and save that, jump back now. And now that we jump back, we are going to click on run and continue and trigger off this flow. So you can see our flow is running. Jump in here, it created the job. If we jump back to our Azure Automation now and find our sample with parameters, we'll see a recent job it already completed. If we open this job up, here's our variable B, our variable A we passed in. Here's our output where it added the two together is 25. If there were any errors, warnings, you'd see them in here. You can pull up the whole log where it views the whole job stream output, any exceptions that are raised. So you can always go back, troubleshoot issues that you have, look for errors if the script didn't run properly. If you do want to do some simple debugging by just doing some right host to make sure the right properties are in variables, you can do all of that and come back to this console later to view it all. Jump back to our runbooks, our history. You can see it ran successfully. It gave us all of our inputs that we passed in, outputs, the job completed successfully, and it gives us all of that. We could, again, use that job output action and flow. If we wanted to grab that output, grab the 25 that we sent to the console, and then use that in a later step of the flow. For now, we're not going to use that. That can get a little goofy to grab too, especially if there's an error and you're grabbing the output and the output is a whole bunch of errors, or if you're outputting a bunch of stuff as the script runs. So I tend to not use that unless I really have to. After that, pretty much set up. Hope you found that useful with getting going with Power Automate and Azure Automation. If you do want a little bit more, there is a conference coming up a week or so from the time this video is getting published. There's a link down in the description right down here below. Go click on that to sign up for a free conference where I will have kind of an extended version of this video where I'll go beyond just how to use this and dive into the details of how you can use it. I'll demo some scripts in the real world of how you can use this for helping to prevent content sprawl, manage information within your company and your Office 365 tenant. If it is post-conference, the link down below should bring you to an all-access purchasing page where I think for like $99 or so, you can go purchase all of the conference videos, ebooks, a whole bunch of resources. That's another great option. Hopefully I'll even have some more of these where in the future I'll dive into some more details, going through some scripts that I've used, how I've actually used this to create some real world solutions. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope this gave you some ideas for ways you can create some automations within your Microsoft 365 environment. Thanks again for watching.